This week we start a new book, the book of Bamidbar. Okay, and I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the fact that in English we refer to this book as the book of Numbers. And the fact that it's called the book of Numbers is based to a certain extent on the fact that in our parsha there are 3 censuses which are taken of the Jewish people. In chapter 1, there is a census of the male population above the age of 20. In chapter 3, there is a census of the Levites above the age of 1 month. And then in chapter 4, there is a third census or a second census of the Levites, those between the ages of 30 to 50 who actually work in the tabernacle. There is a commentary on the Chumash called Ha'amek Davar, which literally means going into the depth of the matter. It was written by a rabbi, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin in the mid to late 1800s. In certain ways, he was actually a revolutionary in that he insisted that besides learning Gemara, they should actually do the weekly parsha in the yeshiva. And he was somebody who very much in his commentary integrates the oral law with the written law. And so he notes that, in fact, the name of the book, Numbers, actually appears in the Talmud, in Masechet Sotah, page 36. And he asks the question of all the things which are in this book, why did the rabbis pick to call it the book of Numbers, Sefer Pekudim, when there are so many other things that they could have named it? And especially if you read through this week's parsha, you'll see that actually it's, you'll excuse me for saying this, somewhat boring, because all that we do is give you a whole list of numbers. And not only that, it's extremely repetitive. So therefore, why should we in the end see the significance of the book being in all these numbers? On Sunday, my class is actually titled, I Am Not a Statistic. So that's what I want to begin talking about today. And I probably will take it in another direction on Sunday. So the Netziv, in trying to explain this, quotes a very interesting midrash. A midrash which appears in Genesis Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah, in the creation story. And the midrash notes that in the section that describes the creation of light, it mentions the word light, or 5 times. And on that basis, the rabbis, this is the world of midrash, say that the 5 times the word or light is mentioned corresponds to the 5 books of the Chumash. And the 4th time it's mentioned is in the verse which says, Vayavdel Elohim bein haor uvein hachoshech, that God separated between the light and the darkness. And then the Midrash says, the separation between light and darkness corresponds to the book of Numbers. And what does it mean? The light is the generation that left Egypt. The darkness is the generation that entered the land of Israel. Now, first of all, I assume all of you would say, this is counterintuitive. This doesn't make sense. The generation that left Egypt had a slave mentality. And as you see in the book of Bamidbar, they commit a whole series of sins, and eventually that whole generation dies in the desert. The generation that grew up in the desert, that entered the land of Israel, they are a righteous generation. In fact, if you read the book of Joshua, you see that they observe the Torah. It says the whole time that Joshua and the elders were alive. So the ones who left Egypt should be the sons of darkness. The ones who entered the land of Israel should be the enlightened ones. So what is this midrash? So now, before I answer that question, so I just want you to realize that this midrash is actually relating to the fact that there are two major censuses of the male population above the age of 20, one which is in chapter 1 in our Parsha, which is of the generation that left Egypt, and the second one, which is in chapter 26 of Bamidbar, which is after that generation has died in the desert. And in fact, they are the, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted by one of the chats. And in fact, let me go back. The second census is in chapter 26 in Bamidbar. And that, in fact, is of the generation that's about to enter the land of Israel. So the Netziv gives the following explanation. And he says that the light and the darkness is not actually referring to the people. The light and darkness is actually referring to the realities in which they live. And I would even add, it's referring to the presence or absence of God. And therefore, what the Netziv says, the generation that left Egypt, they are called the generation of light because they live in a supernatural, miraculous reality. They experience the light of God, how God is manifest in all of God's glory. Everything about their reality is supernatural. The 10 plagues, the splitting of the Red Sea, the manna in the desert, the revelation at Mount Sinai. The generation which enters the land of Israel is a generation where God's presence is very much in the background. It's a generation where if you want to see God in your reality, you actually have to be very sensitive. You have to be very attenuated to detect God's presence. And the Netziv says, this is in fact the movement, the transition, which occurs in the book of Bamidbar. We start off in the book with the reality where God's presence is manifest, the glory of God, which I will speak about much more in a few minutes. But as we move through the book, as the people complain and sin, and I will add parenthetically, this begins in chapter 11, where you have a rapid succession of sins of the people that culminate in the sin of the spies, in the rebellion of Korach in chapter 16, in a certain incident called Baal Peor, where the Jewish people are having sexual relations with Midianite women, bowing to their idols in chapter 24. All of that brings in a reality where God withdraws more and more, where eventually a whole generation dies out, and then we have a new generation which will no longer experience that light of God. And what the Netziv says is that you can actually see this transition in the way the two types of censuses are taken. So that's what I would like to focus on today. And maybe I'll make sure that for those people who are attending the Limud festival, that I'll leave some stuff out so that I'll have something that's going to be new. So let's begin. Let's look at the chapter 1, verse 2. Moses is told, "Su'u et Rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael lemishpechotam leveit avotam." Lift up the head of the congregation of Israel according to their families, according to the house of their fathers, which is another way, Beit Avotam, of saying according to the tribes. The mispar shemot, the number of names, kol zachar legulgulotam, every male according to every head. Now, the way that we have it described over here is that every single person is going to be counted. Every single person will be counted by name. And in fact, I'm not going to go into this in detail. I'll do it at Limud, I think. According to the Ramban, the way the census was actually conducted was that every single man above the age of 20 would actually come before Moses and Aaron and would present himself. I am, for example, take my case, Meir Yehoshua, the son of Zev, hypothetically from the tribe of Judah, so that I presented my name, who my parent was, my tribe, and then what the Ramban says is, and Moshe and Aaron would give each and every one a blessing. And for the moment, let's say the blessing is, may God watch over and protect you. I'll come back to this maybe a little bit later on. And in fact, if you go through the first chapter, you will see that there's a refrain which repeats itself again and again. Look, for example, in verse 20, when it describes, right, the tribe of Ruvain. It says, Toldotam lemishpechotam leveit avotam, and it gives me this refrain, right, of how each one is counted according to their family, according to their tribe, the number of names according to their heads. And then you see in verse 22, Libnei Shimon, for the tribe of Shimon, we say the exact same refrain. And this is actually bothering. Why do we have to repeat the same thing again and again? Why not just give me? Well, for the tribe of Ruvain, this is how many there were. For the tribe of Shimon, this is how many. For the tribe of, excuse me, for the tribe of Gad, this is how many we have. And I'll just throw this out. It seems to be the reason why we repeat the refrain again and again is to highlight the specialness of, number one, each tribe, and to also highlight the significance of every individual in that tribe. And this is what characterizes the first census. Every single person is counted. Every single person has a name. Every single person is not just this individual, but part of a family, part of a tribe. But now I want to say something else, which is going to be very important for, for what the Netziv was saying. If you turn to chapter 2, chapter 2 is the only chapter where I don't have a census. But in fact, chapter 2 is the complement to chapter 1. And if you now look at chapter 2, verse 2, it says, Ish al diglo va'otot levet avotam yachanu b'nei Yisrael mineged saviv le'ohel moed yachanu. In chapter 2, what are we talking about? We're speaking about the arrangement of the camp. And what we have here is a division of the 12 tribes, 3 tribes on each side. The set of 3 tribes is referred to as a degel. A degel means a flag, a banner, because each side had a banner. And not only do they have a banner, but it says they have otot, they have signs. And according to the Midrash, on each banner, there was a symbol, there was a picture, which I will speak about in a moment. And now I also want to point out there's a very interesting division of the tribes. Okay, and this may be a little bit hard to follow because I'm going to do this quickly. You can check it out afterwards. I'll try to speak slowly, so maybe you can follow as I speak. We start off, the first banner, the first flag, is the tribe of Judah. Judah is on the eastern side. Who is with Judah? With Judah, you have Yisachar and Zevulun. What's very interesting is that all 3 of them are children of Leah. If I then move in the next direction, the next banner is on the southern side. Who is on the southern side? The head of the group is Reuven. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad. Reuven and Shimon are children of Leah. Gad is the son of the maidservant, so to speak, of Leah, Zilpah. So that I still have 3 tribes that are somehow connected with Leah. Then I go to the western side. On the western side, I have Ephraim, Menashe, and Binyamin. Ephraim and Menashe are the sons of Joseph. Joseph and Binyamin are the sons of Rachel. And then in the last direction, which is north, I have Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Dan and Naphtali are the children of Bilhah, the maid of Rachel. Asher is the son of Zilpah, the maid of Leah, which means that the last group are the children of the maids of the matriarchs. But what I want you to see is how all of the tribes are arranged according to the matriarchs. Now, we not only speak about which tribe is going to be on which side, but we also tell you the numbers of each tribe individually and also of the degel, of the group of 3. And what we also mention in chapter 2, verse 2, is that it's not just on which side is each group, but all of them are encamped around the tabernacle. The tabernacle is in the center of the camp. And by the way, in chapter 3, when it talks about the census of the Levites, it speaks how the families of Levites, there are 3 families of Levites, are encamped around the tabernacle. And so too, Moshe, Aaron, and his sons. Moshe, Aaron, and his sons are on the east. Kahat, one of the sons of Levi, is in the south. Gershon is in the west. Merari is in the north. So now you're looking at me, why am I doing all this? So the answer is because what we've created over here is a structure. All the tribes have now been structured around the tabernacle. The tabernacle is in the center. Then there is this ring which surrounds them, which is Moshe, Aaron and his sons, and the families of the Levites. And then there's a second ring which surrounds it, which are all the tribes of Israel. All of them arranged in a very systematic way according to the matriarchs. And now I want to get to the punchline. The Netziv says that this arrangement is similar to what you have in the book of Ezekiel, in the first chapter, which is where Ezekiel has this vision of the chariot of God. And not only that, but remember I said to you that there was an emblem on each of the banners. The emblem on the banner of Judah is a lion. The emblem on the banner of Reuven is a person. The emblem on the banner of Ephraim, of Joseph, is an ox. And the emblem on the banner of Dan is an eagle, or to be more exact, a griffin vulture. Those are the 4 faces of the angels that are pulling the chariot of God in this vision of Ezekiel. So what is that saying? That's saying that what we are now doing is not just the census. The census combined how it's done together with the arrangement of the tribes around the Mishkan is now creating this chariot of God. The Jewish people are now being paused to bring in the presence of God into the land of Israel, to bring in the presence of God in all of God's glory. And now let me just diverge for 1 second. If you go back to chapter 1, in verse, in verse 3, when it says, who is being counted? All the men 20 years and up. And it uses the word kol yotzei tzava b'Yisrael, which is usually translated, all those who go out into the army of Israel. And everybody says, well, why are they being counted? Because the Jewish people are now getting ready to enter the land. They're going to have to fight when they enter the land. And so therefore, it's important to know what are the numbers. Everybody knows, right? When you get together an army, you count and see how many people do you have? How many can you rely on before you go into battle? And now I want to throw in something which is interesting. Remember, I said to you that there's a certain movement in the book where we start off with the generation that left, and then we start transitioning to the generation that's going to enter the land. And we're going from one reality to another. And I spoke to you about how there's a certain breakdown Well, that breakdown or that transition begins in chapter 11. But now look at the last two verses of chapter 10. Right? Everybody, feel free. You can actually look in the Tanakh. Usually I know this by heart, but I gather most of my audience doesn't exactly know the verses by heart. So it's good to look in the Tanakh. So look at the end of chapter 10, and you'll see two verses that everyone is familiar with. Vayihi bin Aharon, Vayomer Moshe. And I'm sure everybody loves singing that. I hope that after what I tell you, you won't change your mind. What are you singing about? Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha. Arise, God, let your enemies be scattered. What are we doing there? We're calling to God to actually be fighting our battles as we're about to enter the land of Israel. And in fact, the whole idea, according to at least one commentary, the Sforno, is that the arrangement of the camp now, as I mentioned to you, is the chariot of God, which is entering the land. The chariot of God, which is God in God's glory. The chariot of God, which is overwhelming. When that chariot starts moving into the land of Israel, that is terrifying, overwhelming to the inhabitants, with the idea being that the inhabitants would simply just leave. In fact, there would be no need to actually have to fight. And this is what the Sforno says. What should have happened was that if the Jews entered the land of Israel as the chariot of God, their enemies would have simply scattered, and the Jewish people could have just come in, taken possession of the land of Israel. This is the opening part of the book of Bamidbar. So what I want you to see is, it's not just we're taking a census. It's not just that we want to know the numbers. The way in which the census is being done is essentially having everyone now, okay, I should be careful, have all the males above the age of 20 who now come before Moshe, who now declare we are ready to be part of that army of God, to be part of that chariot of God, to position ourselves. Each one is positioned around the tabernacle, around that place where God's presence is manifested in all of its glory. Now look at the second census. The second census in chapter 26 is a very different type of census. And I want to focus on one specific point. Okay, let me turn myself to chapter 26. We'll look at chapter 26, and let's pick where it begins. Chapter 26, verse 5. If you actually look at verse 4, it sounds similar to what we had in chapter 1. It says you should count the men above the age of 20. But then subsequently in verse 5, it starts with Reuven. And it says, and I'll read this, Reuven Bechor Yisrael, Reuven, the eldest of Israel, Bnei Reuven, the sons of Reuven, Chanoch Mishpachat HaChanochi, Lefalu Mishpachat HaPalui. It tells me who the sons of Reuven were, and it also goes into great detail about the families. How these sons essentially founded family units. Now, in our chapter 1, it doesn't tell me who the sons of Reuven were. It doesn't tell me who the families of Reuven were. Why is it in the second census that we're doing the census according to the families? And by the way, in the second census in chapter 26, it doesn't mention how every single one is counted according to their name. Because the census is not about every individual. It's about the families. And why is it about the families? Because the second census is the generation that's about to enter the land of Israel. The generation where each family will be given a portion of the land of Israel. If I go back to what we said in last week's Parsha, each family will be given their achuzah, their land holding. The second census is not about the tabernacle. The second census is about the connection of those being counted to the land, to their portion in the land. And now I want to speak about something which I didn't really get a chance to speak about in last week's Parsha. Remember, we said last week there was a double Parsha. We spoke about the first one, Parshat Bahar. But in Parshat Bechukotai, it speaks about the blessings and curses. And it essentially says, if you fulfill the commandments, you will get rain in its proper time. Okay, you will have an abundance of food. Everybody realizes that statement is echoed later on in the Shema, in the second paragraph, okay, which focuses on this connection between doing the mitzvot and having rain and having economic well-being. So now what I'd like to say is, God is manifest through nature. But when God is manifest through nature, it's in a hidden way. God is manifest in the tabernacle, in the temple. But when God is manifest in the tabernacle, it's in a very overt way, a very visible way, with the cloud and the fire and all the things that accompany it. In the first census, the Jewish people are being counted in relationship to the tabernacle. They are the chariot of God, which is going to bring that very visible, supernatural God into the land of Israel. The second generation, the one that actually comes in, are being counted with respect to the portions of land that they will be receiving. They will be manifesting God's presence through this whole system of reward and punishment that will be reflected in the produce of the land. So what I've tried to show you is how the census and how it's being, and what it's being connected to, very much is reflecting these two different types of realities. And the place of the people who are being counted in that reality. In the first reality, I am being counted to be, in a certain sense, the guardian, the protector of the tabernacle, to see to that presence of God in the tabernacle, to enable it to actually be visible in all of its glory. And in the second census, I'm being counted to guard the land, to see to it that by the way that I behave, the land will somehow reflect the presence of God in it, by all of its bounty, by how nature is working in such a symbiotic, harmonious way. And according to the Netziv, This is essentially the movement in the book of Bamidbar. Now, I want to just say right now, when I read this Netziv, and even more so when I look at the book, I actually find it a little bit disturbing, sad. And what do I mean by that? If you actually look at what the Netziv is describing, you'll see that this very much parallels the creation story in Genesis. And what do I mean by that? In the first 2 chapters of Genesis, so let's take chapter 1. God creates a very, very structured world, a world which is kitov, beautiful, a world where everything works in harmony. In chapter 2, we have the Garden of Eden. I'll come back to that in 1 second. And here we have this beautiful world where everything has its place. And then all of a sudden we find in chapter 3, everything starts going downhill. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Cain and Abel. Then afterwards we have the generation of the flood. Then afterwards we have stone. Then afterwards we have Egypt. And somehow what you see is that people have difficulty living in what might be called an ideal reality. I might even add people have difficulty living in a reality where God is very manifest. Take the book of Bamidbar. As I mentioned, we have the census. We have everybody arranged around the camp. In fact, if you look at the first 10 chapters, the first 10 chapters is making all of the arrangements so that the Jewish people can now immediately enter the land of Israel. And it seems to be that everything is in place. It's working like clockwork. And then what you find is from chapter 11 on, similar to Breshit, everything starts going awry. By the way, think about this. Not only do I have a whole generation that died in the desert, but I also have a leadership that dies in the desert. It's not coincidental that Moshe, who is a symbol of this miraculous reality, Moshe is on the mountain 40 days, 40 nights. He doesn't eat, he doesn't drink. Moshe is the instrument that brings about all the miracles, whether it be the 10 plagues or the splitting of the Red Sea. He dies in the desert. He's part of that reality of the light. Who enters the land of Israel? Joshua. Joshua is his student. Joshua is his protege. As the Midrash says, if Moshe is like the sun, Joshua is like the moon. Joshua is a reflection of Moshe. Moshe generates light. As we mentioned, right? Ki karan or pnei Moshe. When he comes down the mountain, his face is beaming. Joshua isn't beaming. Joshua is simply reflecting. So I want you to see that in a certain sense, it's very interesting that somehow this says something about human nature. And I would say on 2 levels. On one level, that somehow people have a hard time dealing with ideal realities. When things are really going well, somehow people have a way of always focusing on or finding something to complain about, finding something that irritates them, which enables them to then start messing up their ideal reality. And perhaps the second thing, which I think also appears here, is that when you live in an ideal reality, there are also tremendous expectations and maybe tremendous responsibilities. And maybe people have a hard time living with responsibilities. By the way, for those of you who are a little skeptical about my parallel between the beginning of Bamidbar and between the beginning of Breshit, so I want to just show you one particular literary point to illustrate this. Look in chapter 3 in our Parsha. In chapter 3, where I have the census of the Levites. Before we have the census, we're told of their role. If you look at chapter 3, verse 6, it says, Hakrev et Mate Levi, v'ha'amadeta oto, bring near the tribe of Levi, stand them up before Aaron the priest, v'shertu oto, and let them serve him, be his assistants. V'shamru et mishmarto, they will guard his guarding. V'et mishmeret kol ha'ida, and the guarding of the whole congregation. Lifnei ohel moed. La'avod et avodat ha'mishkan, to serve in the work of the Mishkan. And then a second time, V'shamru et kol kalei ohel moed, they will guard all the utensils of the tent of meeting and the guarding of the Jewish people. La'avod et avodat ha'mishkan. Everybody see, I have two words over here. V'shamru, la'avod. If you go back to the Garden of Eden, this is chapter 2 in Breshit. Chapter 2, verse, let me just check up 1 second. Chapter 2, verse 15. In verse 15, it says, God takes the man that he had created and he places him in the garden, le'ovda u'lishomra. Two words, le'ovda, to work it and to guard it. Now, all of you probably, when you read this, think of Adam being a farmer, being a gardener. That's not what it means. Le'ovda means to actually serve God, worship God. And that's the role of the Garden of Eden. L'shomra is to guard. So I'll tell you a secret now, and we'll talk about it maybe sometime when we get to Parshat Breshit. How do Adam and Eve, how are they supposed to serve and guard? Well, God gave Adam a commandment. Two parts to it. The first part is, from all the trees of the garden you shall surely eat. By eating the trees of the garden, he serves God. How does he guard it? By not eating one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Service is what you actively do. Guarding is what you refrain from. These two words appear also by the Mishkan. And that is the role of the Levi'im. The role of the Levi'im is to be the ones who serve in the Mishkan. But they also have to guard it. What do they have to guard it from? If you look at the end in chapter 3, look at verse 10. It says, and Aaron and his children you should entrust. They will guard their priesthood. And here is the line, Hazar hakarev yumat. The stranger who comes near shall die. The role of the Levites is to guard, protect the Mishkan, to not let anyone who is unauthorized to enter the Mishkan. In the same way, Adam and Eve have to guard to make sure nobody eats nobody being them, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I would even add, it's not just that the Levites keep out the general Jewish population who don't go into the tabernacle. They have to also guard it from the priests. Because the priests, if they don't wear the priestly garments, are not authorized to work in the temple, in the tabernacle. The Levites have to guard it from themselves. If you look at the end of chapter 4, an essential part of the job of the Levites is to transport the tabernacle when the Jews are on the move. And the tribe and the family, not the tribe, the family in chapter 4 is the family of Kahat. Their role is to carry the utensils. But if you look at that section, Aaron and his sons have to, when they're ready to travel, have to first come into the tabernacle, take off the curtain which separates the holy from the holy of holies, cover the ark, and only after Aaron and his sons cover the ark with the parochet, with the curtain, can the family of Kahat then go and carry it. But if the family of Kahat go straight in, and they are the ones who take off the curtain, cover up the ark, they could die. They have desecrated the temple. So I just want you to see that there is a very important parallel between the tabernacle and between the Garden of Eden. And as I said, the structure of the camp and the structure which you find in chapter 1 of Bereshit, the creation story. And in both cases, it's as if we are now creating an ideal reality in which the presence of God is manifest, in a reality in which people have a very natural I-thou encounter. And yet that lasts for a very, very brief moment. And it pretty much collapses almost from the outset. I want to throw in one last thing, and that is Nachmanides, in his introduction to our section, says, or he notes, that this idea of the Levites having to guard the tabernacle is analogous to what we find at Mount Sinai. And since we're going to be celebrating Shavuot next week, at Mount Sinai, God tells Moses, fence off the mountain. Make sure that nobody goes on top of the mountain. And in fact, the only one who's authorized to go is Moshe to the top, Aaron somewhere in the middle, and the general Jewish population at the bottom, at the foot of the mountain. So Nachmanides draws a parallel between the structure which is being set up around the tabernacle and between what was at Mount Sinai. Now, this is my words, what I'm about to say. According to this way of looking at it, it's as if the tabernacle. The tabernacle is Mount Sinai on wheels. And it's as if what you're doing is taking the experience which the Jews had at Sinai, where God is manifest in all of God's glory, where the people are encamped at the foot of the mountain, where Moshe is at the top, and you're taking that construction and now moving that to the tabernacle, but eventually trying to move that into the land of Israel. And by the way, I'll also say, when the Jews were at Sinai, this offered the possibility of a new beginning. right? For those of you who will be on Sunday, we have Rosh Hodesh. It says that the Jews came to Sinai on Rosh Hodesh, right? Vayichan, they encamped at the foot of the mountain. And there's a midrash that Rashi quotes, Belev echad ki ish echad, with one heart, as one person. There was perhaps in one of the few moments in Jewish history a sense of unity among the Jewish people. It looks like the Jewish people have finally gotten their act together at Mount Sinai. And the Jews have the revelation. The Jews enter into a covenantal relationship with God. And then 40 days later, they build the golden calf. So what I want to try to illustrate with what I've been speaking about is there seems to be this chain of the creation story, Mount Sinai, the Tabernacle, and how each time we're making an effort to create a reality where God's presence can be manifest, where people can have this intense relationship with God. And yet each time it seems that people have difficulty living with that. And there is a certain element of sadness that somehow people have to. Now, my colleagues all tell me, but it's a good thing because this way people are more proactive rather than have God do everything. Yes, people are more proactive, but the bar is also much lower. People are more proactive, but their relationship with God is more through Zoom rather than in person. So it's a very, very different type of reality. Okay, so I think I actually succeeded for the people who are going to be doing Limud, that I'm going to be talking about something else, so you can still come to my shiur. But in any case, I want to actually take this opportunity to spend 2 minutes talking about Jerusalem Day. In Israel, Jerusalem Day is an extremely important day for, unfortunately today it's for what would be called the religious population, but once upon a time, it was a day that was extremely important for the general population. And why? Well, this is the day in the Six-Day War that Israel captured Jerusalem. And even in the general public, this is what is known as the day that Jerusalem was reunited. And it's very unfortunate that Jerusalem Day has become very politicized, and very often it's seen as being the day that the right wing celebrates. And this is what I would like to speak about now. Why is this day so important? It's not just because in the end we captured Jerusalem, and it's not just because, and now we have the opportunity to go to the Kotel. It's much more than that. And I just want to take two things to have people understand the significance of this day. In many ways, the capture of Jerusalem and what happened has been an extremely important element in what I would call the ingathering of the exiles in Israel. The Six-Day War, to a great extent, brought to the Jewish world, in particular in the former Soviet Union, a sense of pride in the Jewish people. And not only a sense of pride, but a desire to reconnect to the Jewish people. And to a great extent, the fact that so many Jews from the former Soviet Union are now in Israel is a direct result of what happened in 1967, and I would say even more so with Jerusalem. Ethiopian Jews had the vision for 2,000 years plus of coming to Jerusalem. And when you hear what they speak about, today was, by the way, in Israel, Ethiopian Remembrance Day. Okay, to remember the difficulties that Ethiopian Jews went through to come to Israel today. And any Ethiopian Jew that you will speak to who came to Israel will tell you the vision was, we're going to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is what drew them to come here. It's Jerusalem that brought about the ingathering of the exiles. But the second thing, which also happened in the aftermath of Jerusalem, is what we're doing right now. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. After 67, Jerusalem became the center of Torah for world Jewry. It's not coincidental that the Pardes Institute is in Jerusalem. It's not coincidental that so many other yeshivot are in Jerusalem. It's not coincidental that there is so much which is impacting on all of world Jewry that has its origin in Jerusalem after 67. So that I think it's extremely important for us to appreciate what it meant for us to get back Jerusalem. It's not just this connection with our past, this nostalgia. It's much more than that. It is practically led to this ingathering of the exiles, to the spread of Torah as it's never been before. And I would like to speak on a personal note. It was only after 1967 that all of a sudden Israel became a central focus of my life. Until 1967, so yes, I had an awareness of Israel, and it was the Tanakh, and it was something that was very, very abstract, and I even had close relatives living in Israel, but it was something that was very distant from my reality. But after the 67 war, all of a sudden Israel became very real, to the point where I, like many other people, felt this need to go to Israel. It was an opportunity. Let's see, I finally should go there. And the moment I came there, I was hypnotized. It was as if, as soon as I got off the plane, I knew this is coming home. And what was true for me was true for many other people. And there was a certain period of time when I came where there was, relatively speaking, a large aliyah from the United States. Because there was this feeling which people had of how Israel now is something which we're proud of, which we see as being central to our lives. So I just want to end with a midrash, which is also very appropriate to what I spoke about in the Parsha. There's a midrash in Bereshit Rabbah. This is 59:5 Bereshit Rabbah, which says the following: Yerushalayim oro shel olam. Jerusalem is the light of the world. And it's based on a verse from Isaiah, Yeshayahu, chapter 60, verse 3, where it says, and the nations will go by your light. And that section is talking about Jerusalem. And then the Midrash says, Mihu ora shel Jerusalem. But who is the light of Jerusalem? Jerusalem is the light for the world. But who is the light of Jerusalem? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. And that's another verse that appears in that same paragraph, in that same chapter of Yeshayahu. It says in chapter 60, verse 20, Ki Hashem yeh lach la'or, that God will be to you as light. So what I'd like to end with is to say, the chariot of God, the light, which emanated from that chariot, the light of the tabernacle, eventually found its place in Jerusalem. And this is perhaps the challenge that we have today. How can we somehow bring that light in all of its force to the world at large, to each and every one of us? We were given an unbelievable opportunity, and I will even go so far as to say, my feeling is that what happened in 1967 was no less than a supernatural miracle. With all respect to the Israeli army and to all of our tactics, it was a miracle. And the fact is, we have still not appreciated enough the magnitude of that miracle and the responsibility that it places upon us to see that, in fact, that light of God should be brought out in all of its magnitude to the world at large. I wish you all Yom Yerushalayim Sameach. I wish you a Chag Sameach, Chag Shavuot Sameach. And I hope that we should, and perhaps now also, there's this feeling of maybe in a way being claustrophobic because of Corona, and to a certain extent being, shut in our houses, being in the dark, not being able to necessarily really connect. So may we experience this movement from darkness to light, not just literally, but figuratively, and that we should actually bring much more light into the world. And that light, first and foremost, should be emanating from Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and I look forward to seeing all of you 2 weeks from today, okay? And may we all have a sense of redemption, to be able to now go out and to be able to actually bring more light into the world.